Thank you very much, Ole. Today I'm going to be talking about heart rate variability as a diagnostic tool to test people who are electrically hypersensitive. And we've already had a number of presentations today. Is this mic on? Okay, is this any better? Okay, sorry. I'm going to be talking about heart rate variability as a diagnostic tool to test people who are electrically hypersensitive. And we've had a number of people today discussing whether or not we have biomarkers. And I would like to suggest that this is one biomarker that we can use, although it still needs a little bit more research in order to develop properly. I work with people who are electrically hypersensitive. And one of the symptoms that they complain about is that they have heart palpitations, they have arrhythmia and irregular heartbeat, they experience either high or low blood pressure, and they also experience pain or pressure in the chest area. Of these, the top three, palpitations, arrhythmia, and blood pressure, are something that we can measure objectively. And so when we work with people who are electrically hypersensitive, one of the things they tell me is that when they go into a store where there's a lot of radiation or there's high-intensity lights, they feel as though they're having a heart attack. And very often they go into a store to do shopping and they leave very quickly because they can't tolerate being there for any length of time. And so we interviewed a number of people. In one of our studies, we had 75 individuals, and these are the symptoms of electrical hypersensitivity, and they're in order, in decreasing order. So the top symptom there is headaches. These are the number of people who have severe headaches. These are the number of people who have moderate headaches and mild, and these people don't experience symptoms. And I think you can see here that heart palpitations, some claim to have a rapid heartbeat, arrhythmia, and slower heartbeat. But the top symptoms don't fall into, the heart rate symptoms don't fall into the top symptoms. So they're not the most common symptoms that people experience who claim to be electrically hypersensitive. When we did the study, some of the questions that we asked were, how quickly do you respond to exposure? And some people respond, it takes days, minutes, and those who respond immediately are the ones that we're most interested in the type of testing we do. So if someone has a delayed response to aggravation, then it's probably something we're going to miss in our testing. The other question we ask them is, how quickly do you recover? And once again, very few people in the studies that we've done claim to recover quickly. So we've got a limited portion of the electrosensitive community that we can test with heart rate variability. One of the first experiments we did was proof of concept. And we did a provocation study. And the question we asked is, if we took a cordless phone base station, would it affect the heart? Now, we decided using a cordless phone base station because in North America, the only type of cordless phone that we can purchase radiates all the time. So as soon as you plug it into the wall outlet, you have microwave radiation being generated. In Europe, you have the good fortune to be able to purchase cordless phones that radiate only when you use them. And we can't get these. So before I leave, I'd like someone to, buy me about half dozen, and I'll take them home and sell them. So the question is, if we plug in a cordless phone base station, it emits microwave radiation, will it affect the heart? Can we actually pick this up? The cordless phone that we tested had 2.4 gigahertz frequency. It's the same frequency that we use for Wi-Fi. And we had an intensity of only 3 microwatts per centimeter squared. The ICNIRP guidelines, the American guidelines, are 1,000. Canada, as of a few weeks ago, actually reduced their guideline. They have their guideline. So our guideline now is 540. which is a huge improvement, but it's not nearly enough for protecting people. So basically, we were exposing people to 0.3%, so less than 1% of the ICNIRP guideline. So our government officials would tell us that this radiation is perfectly safe. We use Nerve Express software, but there's a lot of different products that you can get that measures heart rate variability. We put on a chest monitor. We connected the chest monitor to the computer using wires. We were not using wireless technology because that would defeat the purpose of the type of research that we were doing. And we had the cordless phone about 100 centimeters away from where the sensor was, so away from the heart. And this is when a person was lying down on a bed or a massage table. The testing that we did measures the interval between R and R heartbeats. So these are the different ways that heart is classified, and the interval between the R and R peak is what we were actually monitoring. And this is what it would normally look like, where 1 second is a 60 beats per minute. Anything that is tall, the tall lines on this particular graph here indicate a slower heart rate. The shorter lines indicate a faster heart rate. So it's a little counterintuitive because we're measuring time. So when the time is short, it means there are more beats per second. And we would turn the phone on, we would plug it into a live outlet, or we would plug it into a dead outlet. We did this randomly, so we would be plugging things in and out, and they might be plugged into the live several times in a row. So individuals didn't know if they were being exposed or not in our study. Our study was double-blind, so neither the subject being tested nor Dr. Jeff Marangel, who is a heart rate specialist, who uses it on all of his patients. He's done tens of thousands of tests and is really good at interpreting heart rate variability. He didn't know when people were exposed either. So we simply sent him the data and asked him to tell us whether or not he thought someone responded either adversely or positively to some sort of stimulation. In order to do heart rate variability, you have to do something called an orthostatic test first. If you don't do this, you might end up with false negative or false positive results. And an orthostatic test simply means the person is lying down for a few minutes. They then stand up, which puts a certain amount of stress on the heart, and then we measure the heart rate variability. For a professional athlete, this is the type of heart rate we would get. Having a variable heart rate is something that indicates you're very healthy. You have heart health, you have autonomic nervous system health. This is the part where they're lying down. This is the transition period to standing up, and here they're standing up. These tests take approximately 10 minutes to complete, so it's a very quick test that doctors can actually use in their practice. So here we have what looks like a healthy, fit, physically fit person. Here we have someone who's unhealthy and not physically fit. You can see that there's virtually no variability in the heart rate. When this person is lying down, when they stand up, their heart rate increases dramatically because their body is expecting to do something. When they realize that nothing is happening, they're simply standing there, the heart rate begins to drop, so you have a lower heart rate. So here the heart rate was 52 beats per minute. In the transition period, it ranged from 53 to 84, and then when they were standing up, it was 66. For the unfit person, there's no variability. They already have a rapid heart rate just lying down, so they're in sympathetic stress right now, 88 beats per second. There's virtually very little dip, very little change here, and then when they're standing up, they're just slightly higher when they're lying down. This type of person that we were testing would provide a false negative, and I'll provide more information about that. Someone who has atrial fibrillation, this is what their heart would look like. And this is the type of person that we can't test using the technology that we're using. So if we see this in an orthostatic test, we know that we can't work with that particular patient. And then we have something called episodic tachycardia, which means suddenly your heart rate will increase dramatically. And this is what that looks like in an orthostatic test. And what this would give us is a false positive test. So what this is showing is the person is lying down. They have a heart rate that's very close to 60 beats per minute. With absolutely no provocation, the heart rate increases to 121 to 126, and it stays there. So this is not related to them standing up and putting any stress on the heart. And so it's really important that we recognize who these individuals are so we can keep them from the study. The other information that we get from heart rate variability is the physical fitness score. And this is what it happens to look like for the Nerve Express software. Across this axis, we have short-term fitness, which means that if you had a bad night, you might have a lower reading. And this reading will change even within a day, depending on when someone's being tested. We also have long-term fitness along this axis here, and this will change much more slowly. One of the ways that physicians can actually use this information is if they're working with someone who has some chronic illness, they can put them on a regime of either diet or exercise or supplements, and they can see improvements over time. So there's real advantages of using this beyond the purpose that I'm presenting today. Top athletes fall into the top left-hand corner there that's indicated by blue. And people who are chronically ill fall within the green portion, and the rest of us would be somewhere here in the red portion. The rest of us would be somewhere here in the green portion. If the reading for your orthostatic test falls within this purple area, it means you've experienced fatigue during the last day or so. So if you didn't have a good night's sleep, you might actually end up in that section. And then the closer you are down to this level, it means that fatigue might actually be chronic fatigue. So for this person, they would have a fitness score of 6 to 1, 6 here and 1 here. And this is an example of someone who's actually physically fit. Here's another example of someone who would be quite physically fit, 5'3". Here we have someone who's a 10-4, which means that they probably didn't get very much sleep the night before. And here we have someone who falls into the chronic illness area, right down at the bottom, right here, and they have a score of 12 to 7. An individual who would have this type of reaction doesn't have the energy to mount a response. So we would probably expect them not to be a responder, even if they are electrically hypersensitive. So we did a provocation study, and I'm just going to show you results from some of the subjects that we tested, and I just labeled them subject A to G. These are 3-minute intervals approximately, and here we have the R to R ratio. This is the heart rate during those 3-minute intervals, 58, 56, and 58 beats per minute. Can anyone tell me when this person was exposed to the radiation? Okay, you can't tell from these data. They're very similar. And so this is when they were actually exposed during period 2. This was a sham exposure, and this person was labeled non-responsive. They simply didn't respond to any provocation that we did. Here's another example. So this is subject B. While they were lying down, their heart rate was 68. When the cordless phone was radiating, their heart rate jumped to 122. So they're actually still lying down, and suddenly their heart is racing. And when we turned the phone off, it jumped back down to normal, and when we plugged it in again, it increased again. And this is an example of tachycardia, or a very rapid heart rate. Here we have another subject, subject C. This is when they were exposed. You can see a slight increase in heart rate. And we get additional information here about the relative up or down regulation of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And I think what you can see here is the sympathetic nervous system is upregulated during exposure, the parasympathetic nervous system is downregulated during exposure, and this is a typical stress response of a fight or flight response. Just a reminder for those of you who might not be medical doctors that sympathetic is it's your gas pedal to your car. The parasympathetic is like putting on the brakes. So in sympathetic, you're in the fight or flight mode. In parasympathetic, you're in the rest, digest, and heal mode. So if you can't have parasympathetic dominance, your body is not going to heal. Here's another example, subject D. This is when they were exposed. Up in the top corner here, there was not much of a change in heart rate, and you can see upregulation of both sympathetic and parasympathetic. And we get additional information. We have something called HF, which is high frequency, LF, which is low frequency, and this is an indicator of the parasympathetic system, and these two indicate the sympathetic nervous system. And you can see here how there's a huge difference in total power, a change here that's reflected here, and a change here that's reflected here. So we've got multiple measures of how to assess the response of the individual. Now, this is a conglomerate of both their orthostatic test and then provocation here. And the question is this person electrically hypersensitive? This is when they were exposed, and this is what you get. And the answer to that is this person is so chronically ill, they have adrenal exhaustion, and they simply don't have the energy to mount a response. And so you can see everything is absolutely flat. There's absolutely no change. The only other explanation for something like this is that they're on a pacemaker. And so their heart is actually being kept quite stable, irrespective of what is going on. And if we see a person who's down here in this lower right-hand corner, then we simply can't assess them. They're a non-responder, but they don't have the energy to respond. So they might be electrically hypersensitive, but we can't detect it with this kind of testing. Now, one of the questions is, are we actually measuring heart rate, or are we interfering with the technology that we're using? Is this an artifact of the way we're doing the research? So is the interference with the computer and the sensor, or is the interference with the physiology of the individual that we're testing? And so we actually tested for interference. Initially, we had the phone about 100 centimeters from the detector, which is right here. And we moved the phone to be very close to the detector, and you can see that the levels of radiation have increased by 100-fold. So what happens? We took a person who was a non-responder, and this is their sham exposure when it was near their head. This is the sham exposure when it was near their heart. This is real exposure when the cordless phone base was near the heart, and this is the real exposure when it was near the head. If it's electromagnetic interference interfering with technology, very often the higher the level of radiation, the greater the interference would be. So there's no change in heart rate, and there's no change in heart rate variability. And if you look at the sympathetic and parasympathetic response, when we have a change of just 1 unit, that can actually be due to error. So we actually limited our testing to have at least 2-unit change in either direction for the two responses. So we would say that the sympathetic, there was no change. And with the parasympathetic, it came down 1 unit, so we probably classify that as no change, but I'm leaving that as a question mark. Maybe it did go down in this particular testing. So, if it was interference, we wouldn't get a response like this. Once again, we're dealing with a person who is not very healthy. They have moderate fatigue. They're not down here at the bottom. They're slightly higher up. And one of the things that we're noticing, this is when they're exposed with the purple overlay. And I think you can see here they mounted a response that you can see here as well. So they mounted a response there. They mounted a response there. But when they had additional exposure, they stopped reacting. And according to Jeff Marangel, he said this person is probably in adrenal exhaustion as well. And so they did respond the first time, but they didn't have enough energy to keep responding. Here's another example of a subject who came to us and he said, well, I don't respond right away. It takes me a few minutes before I will notice a change in my heart. And so we simply exposed him at random and then monitored him over time. So you can see he was exposed here. That's what it corresponds to with the sympathetic parasympathetic, and this is where he started to respond. So there was indeed a time delay for his response that he warned us about. And once again, if this was due to electromagnetic interference, we wouldn't get this kind of reaction. So we believed that we weren't dealing with an artifact, that we were actually affecting the heart. Now, one of the real concerns I have, and it's been mentioned a number of times already today, is that children at school are exposed to Wi-Fi. They're being irradiated for 6 hours every day of their school days. And a number of students are now beginning to complain of headaches, of having foggy thinking, of being dizzy, of feeling weak, and some are complaining of a racing heart. And so students in a school in the Mountain View area in Ontario were complaining about this. And when we started looking at how many kids were affected, this is some of the information that we got. And this is a subset of all of the results that we're getting. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of what kids are complaining about. 6-year-old girl, musical heart, headaches, dizziness, only happens in school. 12-year-old boy has a racing heart. 12-year-old girl, nausea, vomiting, no fever, insomnia, blurred vision, tachycardia, only at school. 13-year-old boy, heart pounding, insomnia, headaches. This family moved away from the area. He then started going to a school that didn't have Wi-Fi, and all of his heart-related symptoms disappeared. So I think some kids are actually in a position where they're being diagnosed with heart problems when they don't actually have them. The very disappointing information is that a number of young people are having sudden cardiac arrest. It's usually associated with exercise. So when they're running outside, they're playing, their heart is pumping at maximum. They've got cell towers in the community, they've got Wi-Fi in the school, and some of them have had sudden cardiac arrest. In this particular area, the number has actually increased from when I first got these data, but 2 young people have died. And the incidence is 40 times higher than the national average for Canada. The youngest child was 13 years old. The schools are taking this seriously, and one of the things they're doing, instead of getting rid of Wi-Fi, they're putting in defibrillators so that when the kids develop this sudden cardiac arrest, they can be revived. So that's not a solution. I'm almost finished. The information I'm presenting you is actually not new. This is a document that came out in 1969, Biological and Health Effects of Microwave Radiation. And in this document, I'm going to quote from it. In the interest of occupational hygiene, investigators have recommended that cardiovascular abnormalities be used as a screening criteria to exclude people from occupations involving radio frequency exposure. So they knew back in the 1960s that if you have some underlying heart condition, you shouldn't be exposed to microwave radiation. And what I'm recommending is that all children be screened for heart abnormalities before the school year to ensure that they don't fall into that criteria where they could actually suddenly have a heart attack. We published these results in 2010. Now, this is not the only biomarker. This happens to be a dark field microscopy of my blood. This is what my blood looks like in my home, which is relatively electromagnetically clean. You can see that my cells aren't that good in the sense that they're clumping together a little bit. This is what my blood looks like when I use a Wi-Fi for 10 minutes. So I deliberately expose my body to Wi-Fi for 10 minutes, and this is what happens to me. I have one more slide to show you that if our blood goes into rouleau formation, all of the symptoms that we see here can be easily explained because our blood is simply not taking the required oxygen to our cells and getting rid of waste products. So all of those symptoms can be explained to some degree with rouleau formation. That's really quite common in people who are electrically hypersensitive. And I'm going to end on the slide which has nothing to do with human health, but this is a study that we did using pea plants. And the plants on the right were the control. This was after 3 weeks of growth. And these are the ones that we exposed to the same Wi-Fi that I exposed my blood to. And you can see that they're not doing very well. And this is not a psychosomatic reaction of the plant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magda.